Hi, everyone. Stephen Vantassel here, wildlife control consultant, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Glad to have you on board. And if you're wondering what you've gotten stumbled into, well, this show is all about the technical research involved with vertebrate pest control. So we want to ask the lack of ordinary questions, the information that you're not going to necessarily get from a traditional training podcast. So, as you can tell today, we have a special guest. His name is Sheldon Dillingham. He is the owner of Avitrol Corporation, and his website is avitrol.com. Now, if you're not familiar with Avitrol, Avitrol is a chemical frightening product that's used to frighten flocks away from areas where they're not wanted. So a lot of you are going to think of it, well, that's a avicide. No, it's not designed as an avicide. It does have some avicidal properties, but that's not its primary goal. And we're going to talk more about that today. And so we're really glad to have you, Sheldon, joining us today on the Living the Wildlife podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. I really appreciate it. As you know, Tashina, my wife as well, is very much involved in what we do. And one of the earliest memories that I have back relating with you, because we have worked on different things over the years and talked over the years for different things, um, is is one of the articles I think that you had written. This was actually, I mean, like we had just bought it, I think maybe 15 years ago or something, and fairly close to that. You had put something out. And this was before we got a lot of the stewardship stuff in place and the training stuff and then all of that stuff in place. And you were still able to kind of see through some of the noise a little bit. And
Yeah.
hold on, guys, like
Yeah, let's wait.
there's a lot of misuse happening right now. Like, if you
Yeah.
just did this, then it would be okay. It's these bad actors. It's not all of it. And so I'm grateful for that. And
Well, I
so that's
appreciate
why
that. Yeah.
you reached out, and I was like, man, I'd love to be on with you. So
Well, I am really glad. You're dating me now. This is way back when I was when I was back in Nebraska. The I'm always concerned about losing product, and I was scared because there was talk. I mean, for whatever it's worth, rumors are rumors, right? But there was talk that Avitrol would go away, and I'm like, what? And you know, I was I was grateful that someone came in. Ultimately, it was you came in and kind of, I'm going to call it rescue. That's my word. Rescue the company, or at least keep it from going away. Because we have so few products in vertebrate pest control,
mhm,
and
mhm.
I am loath to lose anything right now. And unfortunately, that's what's happening. So, yeah, and you've raised that issue. I mean, historically, Avitrol has gotten a really an unfortunate reputation with people using it hot, right? I mean, so why don't you talk about that evolution with you purchased the company and
Yeah.
how you know, how you took it to a different place today.
A lot of us banging our head against the brick wall and finding out which bricks hurt less. It's probably my wife and I came into the industry from outside the industry years ago. She worked for Avitrol for about 4 years, 4 or 5 years. I did some stuff, attended some trade shows, and
Mhm.
did some things there, for Avitrol, kind of on the side as I was working. But my background is actually in technology. That's actually where my formal education comes from. And so we were able to kind of combine some of that with some of the modern tech and some of the things that were happening there with the biotech side of it, that we were already navigating. But um, really, what we ran into across the board, and honestly, like company size here didn't matter, is irrelevant. There were so many people with where their degree of training was, here's a box, read the label. My supervisor handed this to me, said, here's a
Yeah,
box, read the label, and we all know how well that works.
right.
And so honestly, that was the biggest thing that we ran into, especially early on, where people were just not trained.
Yeah.
Uh, And so they're just kind of making do with what they can. I think some of the smaller percentage stuff, this is a little bit later on, would be um, there needed to be some imposed stewardship on that, and it did layered over in addition to the training.
Yeah.
Part of that had to do with the fact that corporate is going to spend a ton of money the training guys and maybe even flying guys to places to train and all that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, when that service specialist is on the roof for something and it's at night or it's 5 o'clock in the morning and it's 20 degrees outside, and the wind is blowing, they're going to do whatever they want to.
Yeah.
Much to corporate chagrin.
Yeah.
And so, that's probably the smaller percentage issue.
Yeah.
But we ran it. That's kind of the two sides of the coin, basically, with a couple of the issues that we ran into, I think, earlier.
So let's to kind of for those in our audience who don't know, aren't familiar, because a lot of people in the wildlife control field don't have pesticide licenses, and shame on you, you should get one. Just that's me. Get your pesticide license, if nothing else, just as a backup to
Yep.
be able to use products, because Avitrol is an RUP, a restricted use pesticide. So describe what the product is
Yep.
and what its primary, what its classic use case is.
Yep.
And then I would like you to move into, 5 myths that you would like to dispel about the product that people believe that is really a distortion of what the product is or does.
Yeah. So essentially, the modus operandi of the product here is we need to change the way that birds are communicating about a location.
Mm,
And so it works by changing the way that birds are fundamentally communicating about a location. Um, every flock of birds has a series of alpha birds that are, integrated into the flock. This is the reason why birds can sort of change directions at the drop of, like, flocks of birds can change directions at the drop of a hat. There are scientific studies that show that, a flock of starlings, you see those large murmurations that, like, one bird is communicating to, the surrounding 6 or 8 birds. It's this really amazing, incredible, complex network where they are communicating so they can move essentially almost as one body.
right.
And it's thought that the reason why those murmurations happen is because, there's a predator nearby or something like that, particularly predator bird, and it confuses them. It confuses that bird, right? Where they can't actually get in there and go after one of those birds
Right.
because it feels like, I mean, I've actually in the field stood in the middle of, I had to sneak up to do this at, this was probably like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And so the starlings were actually roosting in a field of trees. And I was able to very quietly sort of sneak up, in there and sort of stir them up basically in the middle of the
Wow.
night.
Yeah.
And it actually feels like you are encountering one large wild animal. It actually smells like a large wild animal. I mean, it was pretty shocking to me,
Wow.
the first time I
Wow.
did it. Um, and so anyway, all that being said, so they communicate, and so the reason why, you'll go to, let's say, a shopping center, and the shopping center on one side of the street there's no birds, and the shopping center on the other side of the street is just covered up in birds, is because you've got your alphas and they're looking at it and they're saying this is not safe, like this thing and this thing and this thing, and oftentimes it's not things that we are paying attention to if we've got an untrained eye. But they're saying that that's a risk there, that's a risk there, that's a risk there. They're looking for food, water, and harborage, and they're looking for things that are very, very safe to attain those things. And so one of the common mistakes that we even see is, like, guys will think, well, man, why should the bird, so what we've got is a grain bait. And so it's like, why should the bird actually eat this grain over the grain spillage that's out here, or
Mm,
the French fries that are sitting on the ground, or whatever it is,
yeah.
And one of the things that we commonly train on is we're like, listen, like, you could put filet mignon down there, on the ground in an unsafe place, and put corn up right next to a bird at a place where it's already flagged as being a safe place because that's where it's hanging out, and it's going to eat that corn before it goes after that, delicious whatever that is down there.
Yeah, so that bird has to balance the threat benefit ratio,
That's
basically,
it.
is what you're saying. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I love the way you phrase that Avitrol affects the way birds communicate about a location. I don't think I've ever heard that
Mhm.
phrased that way before. I like the way that sounds. So Avitrol interferes with that. And how does it interfere with that?
Yeah, so what it does is it temporarily affects the bird's central nervous system. And it's the what it does is it really, honestly, we're using their own natural biology and communication process to work in our favor. Like, when they're out of sight, like um, they've decided this is a safe place. We should reproduce here. We should eat here. We should all of those things or whatever. So it's working against us, right? That's the reason why they're there. And then they communicate, and like if they're a migrating flock, then they come back to the same place over and over and over again. They bring their friends
Right.
with them,
Yeah.
and yeah, right. They
Why
reproduce.
mess with a good thing?
Yeah, right. Exactly, right.
Right.
Especially too. I mean, if you really think about it, especially around humans and wildlife, and I know you get into this probably with the show. It's not like, if I'm a bird, it's not like there's just this unlimited space for me to find food, water, and harborage. Like, particularly as cities are developing and all these other things are happening, right? So as those places develop, they're going to triple down, like on those places where it's like, hold on, you've got me a great food source here. I've got easy water. I mean, even little things like condensation drip from HVAC units on the top of
Right.
the,
Yeah.
or puddles from pooling water from rain. So it temporarily affects the central nervous system, which is the same thing that triggers fight or flight, right? So really, essentially, the reason why they're hanging out at the site and they flagged as a safe place is because fight or flight isn't being triggered. There's no danger there. So we just have to get them to associate the site with danger, which, by the way, this is the reason why, we'll be talking to end customers, like not just service providers, but end customers, whether it be a food processing plant, maybe plant supervisor or whatever, maybe it's a Q&A guy, or something like that. Following up on something, like if maybe there was a baiting treatment that's proposed and they decide they want to try something else or whatever, and it'll be like this actually just happened within the last few weeks. Like, it was a plant that we had talked to last year, and they decided they wanted to go with something like sonic repellers or something like that. They wanted to give that a shot or whatever. And I'm not throwing stones at a particular
Uh,
per se, but
but I, yeah.
if the shoe fits, just go there,
Yeah.
Um, but I have enough pictures. I have enough pictures that PMPs actually send me a bird sitting on top of the units with droppings all over them. So anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but in either case, um, they were like, "Yeah, we tried it and it worked for 2 weeks." And then it's like, yeah, because, and this is true about a lot of the methods deployed when you talk about birds.
Yeah.
Again, if they have found that perfect combination of food, water, harborage, it will either all three of those things or two out of three or one of the three or whatever it is, they're going to hunker down in there. There's a reason why if we try to exclude them, oftentimes they will just move to another spot where they can't be excluded, like unless
Right.
there's,
Yeah.
um, because that opportunity is still there for them. So affects that central nervous system, triggers fight or flight, that those alphas are now communicating, hey, this is not a safe place. This is a part of the reason why pre-baiting is required, because that's what makes for an effective communication. Otherwise, without the pre-baiting, aside from any kind of potential risk of something else getting into it, which I
Yeah.
can talk about how we keep that from happening now too.
Mhm.
um, they'll they will communicate there's something wrong with the food that we're eating instead of there's something wrong with the location. It's like they have this little checklist in their brain, or mental checklist, where they go, well, I did that and that didn't change. I did that and that didn't change. I did that and that didn't change. Okay, it must be something wrong with the site. We must be being attacked or something like that.
Oh, okay. All right. Because I've been through one of your trainings, and so you're either I forgot or some of this information is even new to me. So, which is really cool. So, just to summarize, so we have Avitrol now as you're changing how the dominant birds are communicating with the flock about whether things are copacetic or not, and it's Avitrol tells them it's not copacetic, and so by stimulating their CNS, so now that's distributed to the flock. So then they what imprint the fear to that location, and then they just don't want to come back because it's like, I guess,
Yeah.
burned into their neurons, for lack of a
Yes.
better word, and it's just like
Yeah.
that spot's dangerous.
Yeah, right. Like, this is, I think, how survival works. I mean, even like dominant species that don't have natural predators stay away from places that are, that they consider to be unsafe. Like they're looking for an ideal location. And it's the same thing with these birds. In fact, we've actually seen in the field, we've actually watched flocks of birds split up mid-air as they fly over a location and regroup on the other side. That's how strong of a negative reaction we've actually seen and
That's
witnessed.
bizarre. Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
So
it's
that's
pretty crazy.
amazing. So
Now,
if you had treated it, let's say you're treating a 3 or 4 story building, and you did your baiting on the surface, so when the birds are flying over, they'll split the flock to kind of give birth to the building and then recollect at the other end. That is
we've seen that
amazing.
before. Yeah,
That's
it's pretty
amazing.
crazy.
All
I
right.
won't say that happens every time, but we've
Yeah.
observed it and we've been like, oh my gosh, wow, like these birds really, really, there were some really effective communicating in this particular flock.
Okay. So what is the can so what are five, like I'm just throwing out five. You're
Yeah.
free to use less or more. I don't want to box you in here because I'm putting you on the spot. What are some myths that you would like to dispel for our audience that people have about Avitrol that they need to that's a distortion of what the product actually is?
Absolutely. Like I think there's like a lot of like little subsidiary things that I could mention and they're probably Googleable, if that's a word, if not, I just
Sure. Yeah.
but I think the biggest misconception is that Avitrol is a product and not a system. Um, that is probably the largest misconception, and that feeds all of the subsidiaries. It feeds misuse. It feeds all of that kind of stuff. Right. So like as teams are working with our team, one of the things that we provide them with, and this is like free of charge type stuff, is we provide them with an op sheet or an operation sheet. And this gets so specific that it gets down to like how much bait goes in each individual baiting tray and when that should go in there. And I'm talking about down to the decimal point, both during the pre-baiting process and the active baiting process.
Wow. How do you
Yes.
have time for all that?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
So
exactly. I
I'm
mean,
like, wow.
it's
It's
that's what our bird specialists will do. Like, so if
okay.
someone is having that conversation and they're saying, "Hey, I've got this parking garage, or I've got this hotel in Vegas, or whatever the thing is that's having this bird issue, can you help me?" Like, our team will do both the sales and the ops side. Like, it's like our team creates proposals. We'll help price the whole thing. We work with companies on their company hourly rate, like all that kind of stuff. If they need materials for the pitch, all that, we'll do that. We've actually done co-pitches with companies too. So our team is trained to close bird work. In addition to make sure that the ops side can actually execute the bird work once it's sold.
Yeah.
And so a lot of teams, the reason why their bird process doesn't scale is because they don't have a bird process to begin with. It's like the customer asked me about, whatever it is. I didn't want to lose my customer. So I said yes to this thing or whatever. And I just kind of jumped into it or whatever.
Right.
And now I'm buying boxes and I'm just kind of glancing at the label and I'm trying to make sure I'm, staying okay and all
Right.
this stuff. But truly, if you're really anything you're doing is going to be a system, but for sure, if you're working with chemicals that are developed through a scientific process for a very specific scientific purpose.
Right.
And so you need a system of implementation. That sounds maybe daunting, like if someone hasn't ever gone through that before, but we walk guys through the process. But the end result is these guys, as they're working through and using the system, is guys will go in and they will do these treatments in very, very sensitive areas with no incident, oftentimes with no mortality at all.
It's
Very
amazing.
happy customers and a recurring setup for recurring revenue.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a really clear line between the guys that are doing that and working directly with us on those types of programs and have a system in place, and the guys that don't. The guys that don't, honestly, if you Google an incident, and it shows up like anywhere, they weren't working with us.
Right.
And I can say that with surety, like time and time and time again. Um, Now, I will also say, just talk about misconceptions. Um, Getting a little more granular here. Um, you do have to be careful, like if you're Googling something, the information that you see. Like we ran into this in an incident recently, on the East Coast where the news media was reporting all sorts of stuff, and we got on with the PMP and found out that the whole thing was a witch hunt. I mean, like it was like they were pulling out documents, they were showing so like, no, we did this, we did this, so we did this. Um, and then what we also found, we love regulators if you're listening, so that's awesome. We help a lot of regulators.
Sure.
But we did also find that, even the state regulators that they were working with didn't know the regs, so
Yeah.
they were quoting stuff and saying stuff, and it was like our regulatory team actually had to get into the middle of it and say, no, 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 here, listen, yes, this bird is technically protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, but it actually falls under the depredation order. They don't
Yep.
need a permit on the front side. Look at your state regs. Your state
Right.
regs say that you default to the Migratory Bird Treaty. The federal, you don't default to like your own separate thing, which means then that this depredation order requires reporting by like January 31st, the following calendar year. They actually have 8 months to report these incidents. And by the way, that's only like birds that have actually fallen.
Yep.
Um, that same reporting requirement is also like on anything that you're going to do in bird, by the way. Like,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
I've actually seen, guys, this actually happened in Nevada, I believe. Like, it was a hotel treatment, and they were like hanging net, and they actually got fined for killing brewers' blackbirds. Right? Like, yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, like who knew? Or guys going up there and again, you just see this kind of stuff. Guys are going up, they're pulling nests, they're not looking at stuff or whatever, right? Probably not running the right PPE either. That's a
Mhm.
whole other topic.
That's a whole other world. Yeah, we'll
Whole
we'll
other
sidestep that.
Yeah, right. But like not knowing like bird identification and nest identification, they'll get in there and they'll pull some nest or whatever, and it's like, guys, you realize that like the egg in the nest, like if it's a protected bird, it's just as protected as a full grown
That's right.
bird.
Yeah.
And some of these birds are actually brood parasites too, right? Like they will lay eggs in the net, or sometimes they'll take over another nest
Yeah,
even.
the
And
brown-headed
so
cowbird. Yeah.
yeah, right. Yeah. So like, they might get in there and pull something in there, and it's like you actually have a requirement to report
Yes.
those eggs. And if it gets found out, I mean, we could be talking about $100,000 fine per incident.
Yeah.
I think for organizations it's up to $200,000.
Oh
Like,
my gosh, yeah.
yeah,
But just to sort of recap, for those of you that are
yeah.
sort of feeling a little lost on the bird world, what Sheldon is referring to is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which says that all native migratory birds are protected under a federal treaty with Mexico, Canada, and I believe even Russia and Japan now are signatories. So what this means is you are not allowed to harm these birds, or take is one of the official words, take these birds without a permit. But there is an exception clause for some of the blackbirds, what's called a standing depredation order, and you have to meet certain criteria. And one of those is if you do harm one of those birds under the standing depredation order, you're supposed to report that information yearly to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And if you're doing that, they have the right to visit you and inspect your property where you're treating at any reasonable hour.
Mhm.
So you get some privileges, but you also lose some privacy with it as well. And so
Yeah.
he's saying, look, whether you're using a net, a lot of people, it's one of my pet peeves. Let me just go on a rant here. When people think everything, just because you're putting up a net means it's automatically non-lethal.
Yes,
No,
right.
it can be non-lethal, but
Yep.
it may be less lethal
Yep.
because, as you mentioned, birds may be getting trapped inside and all
Yep.
kinds of things. So, we may do a podcast on the Migratory Bird Treaty Act in the future, but
Yeah.
that we're just going to put a parentheses around that. Make sure you follow the law, folks.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll add to it as well, just real quick on so the depredation order,
Mhm.
it's blackbirds, cowbirds,
Yep.
grackles, magpies, crows, and I think I'm missing one other bird in there.
Gra Grackles?
I think I mentioned
Did you mention
grackles.
grackles?
Yeah, I'd have to look. I'd have to pull
Yeah.
up. There's one other in there.
Okay.
Uh, but yeah, that is your exception clause, and it's actually astounding to me how few know about
Yeah.
about that clause.
Yeah.
So
I think I need to do a deep dive on that because it is confusing. And so I fully understand why some of your state regulators aren't familiar
yep,
with
agreed.
some of this because most of the center of gravity in pesticide regulation is weeds and
Yep,
bugs. That's I
yep,
mean, the reality is vertebrate control is an
right,
afterthought.
yeah.
That's where the money is, and so it makes complete. So when they get a complaint, they don't know how to. They may not know how to handle that, and it's
Right.
out of their bailiwick.
And I will definitely say again, man, to reiterate, like we love working with regulators.
Mhm.
There are a ton of them from like basically every state in the country, like on our email list and all that. So I mean, like we've actually had them if they suspect a violation, we've had them actually reach out to us to ask questions, and we will help with all of that kind of stuff because we want to make sure that they make the right call as well. And so I would actually encourage if you happen to be a regulator that stumbled across the show or you're listening or something, feel free to reach out. Like we've trained and certified regulators
Oh,
before.
great.
We're more than happy to do that. That's not a big deal at all.
Yeah. So you talked about how the myth number one is Avitrol is the myth is it's a product, not a system. So the positive side is Avitrol is part of a system of bird control. The second issue is be careful of your Google search learning about Avitrol and that these incidents may not have been reported correctly, or there may have been an issue of misuse. It could go either way, or both and.
Yep.
Do you have a third potential myth that people are often struggle with? I would think maybe for those of us who are older who remember
Yeah.
the pre 15 years
Yeah.
ago dates.
Yes, so the subsidiary, like the elephant in the room, so to speak, right?
Right.
That would be like, okay, if I use this, I'm raining birds out of the sky, or I'm killing birds, and that's my overall objective as I navigate it. Most of the treatments that we navigate are not that. In fact, you might be shocked. We've reduced the use of active ingredient I mean, not the formulation hasn't changed, but just the
Yeah.
use of active ingredient, we've reduced by probably about 75%, like over the last
So
like 15 years.
that's
Um,
amazing.
and simultaneously, there are more treatments going on than ever in the history of Avitrol biotechnologies. Um, how we've done that has been helping guys with their mixture ratio. The thing is all we need to do is get these primary birds communicating. That's it. We don't need every bird in the flock trying to communicate. We don't even need like 20% of the birds in the flock trying to communicate at all whatsoever. um, and so what we found to be really effective is a 1 to 40 dilution ratio, one part treated to 40
Okay.
parts untreated, so 41 total parts. Um, what we've also found is that like granule size matters too. So now one of our most popular products is the mixed grains product. So let me back up just a little bit. We
Hmm.
released a product called Easy Blend, which is a
Yeah.
yes. So it's a pre-measured
Pre-mixed. Yep.
That's right. Pre-measured product, measured directly from us, like at our factories, and basically it's got your untreated and it's got your treated in there. You you open it up, you dump a jar in, you mix it up, and it's a perfect 1 to 40 blend. We did that because what we found is that rather than using outside of messing up dilution ratios or not diluting correctly
Right.
or at all, so
Or at all. Right.
that's a label violation, by the way. Um,
Yes, it is.
um, yeah, right. Um, what we also found is that the way guys were measuring would oftentimes be by like the volume method. That's what we call it, rather
Yeah.
than by the weight method. And
Right.
so what they were doing is they were going like, and you be, well, you wouldn't be, but listeners might be shocked. Even at some of the size of the companies, where it'd be like, okay, what mixture ratio did you use? I used a whatever, a 1 to 40 or something, right? And it's like, okay, great. How did you measure it out? It's like, well, like I used one of those solo cups, and it was like,
Right.
yeah, for every
Stupid.
one cup of, I'm like, hold
Yeah.
on, are you telling me you
Yeah.
did 41 solo cups and got them exactly right, and then you did that how many times? It's like, no,
Yeah.
like no way, like
Yeah.
that is not science.
Right. I remember that from your training, right? So just to give people a historical view, back in the day,
Yeah,
it, the ratio was 1 to 5 on the hot end. That's
yep,
one active kernel for
yep,
5 untreated kernels,
yep.
up to 1 to 29, which would have been the low end of the treatment, 1 to 29. Sheldon's telling us that their preferred blend is 1 to 40, which is another almost double the
Yeah,
reduction, almost another 100% reduction of the active ingredient, which is just amazing.
yeah, that's how, I mean, like that's how powerful the effects of the active are, or I should say how effective the effects of the active are at getting birds to communicate. Like, and that's really how it was intended from the beginning. Um, I think what's been acceptable by the market is what's changed like over the years.
Yeah.
Um, and so we really came in and changed with it, but we did see the lack of training there. And then the other side of it again, that easy blend product is really our answer to, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's our answer to the control aspect. So if someone is concerned, they've got a fleet of trucks or something like that, could be a large fleet or small fleet, and they're concerned about making sure that it's done right. This eliminates the concern. And what we found, particularly, especially with the large and medium sized brands, is that really assuaged a lot of the concern
Mm.
that they had. It was like, oh, wow, okay, we can make sure that this is mixed correctly. I mean, honestly, in fact, it is genuinely like we have yet to have any incident happen. We rolled out Easy Blend, I think 4 years ago now. We've yet to have a single incident happen
That's amazing.
yeah, right.
And I would think that's just more the convenience factor for for a business owner saying, look, I don't have to worry about my guys making a mistake. Was that, they shouldn't be using scoops, but we know that they're probably going to be using scoops. Was that, well, did I put in 5 scoops or did I put in 10 scoops? You lose count. I think the convenience factor. Now, back in the day, I have to go pre, kind of pre-Sheldon or Mr. Dillingham here, the pre-Sheldon. Again, that was at 1 to 5 to 1 to 29. At the 1
Roll
to
that.
29 level, I recall it was a 4% expected mortality for pigeons at the 1 to 25. You could have up to that. And I think it's less for house sparrows and more for
Yep.
starlings. I always
That's,
screw that up. But
yep.
at 1 to 40, what is the ratio? Oh, let's say worst case scenario of what kind of mortality should you expect? Worst case scenario for pigeons at a 1 to 40.
Yeah, I mean, like one to 40, you're talking about like honestly, probably less than 1%, somewhere in there, as far as your worst case goes. And I'm talking like, yeah, I mean this happened like recently. I mean, large apartment complex, like 500 or so pigeons
Wow.
there, and we're talking, I think we had 4 birds. I think it was 4 birds that actually
That's it. That's
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the thing is too that a lot of guys don't recognize as well is that, birds get sick like humans do as well too. Like birds can have weak hearts. They can have, weak immune systems, like all sorts of stuff. Oh, there are all sorts of diseases. You can look them up
Oh
and
yeah.
find it, or the listeners can look them up and find them.
Yeah.
And so if your fight or flight kicks in, I mean, think about a guy who hasn't run in, like, 30 years and has been sitting on his couch. You know what I mean? Like just tossing back beers every night. That guy's probably gonna have a heart attack if he goes to
Right.
try and run all of a sudden, right?
Yeah. Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
and so that kind of stuff can also happen with birds as well.
Yeah.
Um, and so
But
yeah,
it's not the horror story where you'd have, pigeons dive bombing in communities and the kids are screaming. It makes the newspaper. And think about that. 500 birds have been evicted off this roof, let's say, and only 4 mortalities were identified. That's just, yeah,
yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean it's
Yeah.
it's arguable that I think we've talked about this before, but it's like I've seen birds die from every method used in bird control.
Sure. Yeah.
Like we have a proclivity in Western society, right, to or some do anyway, to demonize chemical use.
Right.
And
Right.
it's one of those things where it's like, no, like not everything is apples to apples. Don't get me wrong. Like there
Right.
are definitely chemicals that are will just blaze everything in sight, right?
Sure.
But honestly, there are a lot of things that fall even under the restricted use category where it's like, man, have you, I ask guys all the time, like, have you pulled out like a gallon of bleach or whatever and read the label? Like that thing
That's right.
should be restricted
Yeah,
use.
it is a pesticide, folks. Right. A lot of people, the people who hate chemicals,
Yeah,
like,
right.
yeah, I made a comment about that recently. So when you have these, so this particular product, so let's talk about uh like what's the ideal situation, or maybe that's the wrong way to phrase it. What are some of the classic, maybe that's a better way to, some of the
Yeah,
classic situations where Avitrol is like, this is the tool that fits this situation, like
yeah,
this is like, you want to definitely
absolutely.
consider that. Yeah.
Yes, like, so as an overarching, we sell in about 17 core verticals, right? So there are a bunch of like classic things, but what I
Okay.
could say is, can the birds leave, right? Like, is
Okay.
the question that you want to ask, right? Like, are these birds absolutely trapped and they can't get out of here, or can they actually leave? So and I'm not saying that we haven't had, situations where, I won't name the
Hmm.
place, but I mean, like
Right.
we've done multiple hotels on the strip in Vegas
Hmm.
over the years, and had one where huge hotel, and sparrows were deep in the hotel. It's like there's not, like, I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, the birds can't, it's like, so we still use it now. You can per the label, you can use it at a pretty hot mix, right? And
Right.
you're causing mortality, but the truth is that, like, you're not going to go use a sparrow trap or whatever and catch those sparrows missing at them or whatever, and then go release them outside. I
Yeah.
mean, if
No.
you're reputable, you're not going to,
No.
because
Don't
because
release.
they will
Don't.
find their way right back in the building.
No second chances, folks.
Yeah, yes, exactly right. Like, so you're going to euthanize those birds anyway.
Hmm.
So it's just, what method are you going to use to do it? So that's really the question that I encourage guys to ask is, like, can birds actually leave?
Yeah.
Volume
Okay.
of birds doesn't really matter. I mean, we help teams sell, for 5 and 10 birds. And we help teams sell. I think the largest one that I'm aware of was a little over 1 million birds.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's when you're starting to get into big feed yard and like dairy outfits and stuff like that.
How many? Let me just interrupt you here. A million birds. How many bait trays would you possibly need for that? I'm just trying to think about how, like,
Yeah.
you do you bring in a an 18-wheeler flatbed truck with full of bait
You know,
trays? Because I
yeah, so when it starts to get into those
oh my
applications,
gosh,
because it's so wide open, and oftentimes these farms are like the only like real food source for flocks
right,
that size,
yeah,
especially if they're migrating,
yeah,
for miles and miles around. Um, the treatment's different than what you would get into with your standard sort of commercial treatment.
oh okay,
So
all right,
in which case we might be talking about, troughs that are inaccessible for for livestock and like all that kind of stuff, kind
okay,
of changing that feeding pattern basically. But those are the situations where you'll look at those troughs, you'll look at those alleys, and you can't see the ground, like you can't see the trough. It's just black flapping wings. It looks like asphalt or something,
yeah, right,
at,
right,
at a distance.
all right.
But yeah, it is effective on flocks of all sizes.
But the key is that whether whoever the wildlife control company or pest control company is, say yes because your company will give them the proper support. If they reach out to you, you will, you know, hold them by the hand. These are my words. You'll hold them by the hand, walk them through the process. And it's like, yes, we can do this, help them with the bidding. And but stop saying no, folks. Start saying yes, is
Yes.
what you're saying.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
fact, like we have a full certification training as well, which we made it easier this year for you, for if anybody's listening and thinking about it. And we released a master class. And that is a pre-recorded class now. It's got over 4 hours of content in it. So the breaks and all that stuff aren't in there.
Mhm.
Um, and you can just digest that like as you go. What's great is like there are CEUs like attached to that as well too. So if you're looking for CEUs or refresh there, you've got that also. And what's cool too about that is from a CEU standpoint, because we are both invertebrate wildlife, and we fall under pesticide. You actually, a lot of times guys can get, if the state offers it, they can actually get sort of these dual credits both in
Right.
vertebrate wildlife if they need those CEUs, in
Yeah.
addition to in addition to some of the more standard stuff that they might deal with pesticides. um, but that's available as well too. The other thing that I'll say is we also offer free like 30-minute to hour long digital sessions, like if they, because guys will do stuff at the beginning of the week with their teams or into the week with their teams,
Oh,
and we come in and we offer all of that for free, that particular type of training for free, so that guys can become educated that way.
so your company, a representative of your company will zoom in and do a little Avitrol training session for that particular company for that particular day, which
Yep.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, both, and that's both honestly, like really it's every topic that you could think of. One of the things I have kind of found, and I know, obviously most of the time when we talk about training, we end up being on the ops side. One of the things I found kind of on the in pests and in wildlife, sales training is
Mm,
it's very underutilized.
yeah. Yeah.
Particularly starting to get into, getting into topics like closing. Like, what does a closing process actually look like? How do you actually close from the beginning of a sale to the end of the sale to ensure that it actually goes through? Is there a process, a repeatable process to that? And so we actually offer both full sales training on every part of the process, from proposing to closing to the in between, in addition to like templates that are proven to help close jobs, and also like, I mean, email templates, and again, everything about it is a system. Really what we did is we took it and we said, okay, how can we create a system where a guy can go from zero, I'm not really doing any bird, to I can create a repeatable process where it's like I'm delivering like predictable results, but I'm also delivering predictable sales year over year over year. And so that's really what we offer there.
The what can you do you have the ability, or does your company have the ability to work with companies that are not licensed, but they have the lead of the client, can someone sort of hand that job off to you, or is there a way that they can get a little bit of piece of the action? Do you
Yeah,
have a team that comes in? Explain that process for those
yeah,
who say, I'm not going to. I talk to some people. They're like, we're never pesticiding, but they might be open to having someone else as either a
yeah,
subcontractor or whatever the
yeah.
case may be.
Absolutely. So there's actually a couple. Thank you for asking that question
Hmm.
because I wouldn't have thought about it.
Yep.
But there are a couple of things that could be in just insanely great, I think, for operators, even if they don't want to do some of the applications. So one of the arms of our business that we offer is called direct to business. And so one of the things we used to do is we used to hand off leads and stuff like that or whatever. And one of the problems that we would run into was that we would hand leads off and we were like, man, these close rates are lower than we would like them to be. Most of the time that was because we didn't actually have our hand like inside the process, and the timing wasn't quite right. Like we'd be back in touch with the operator, but their follow-up process maybe wasn't super strong. One of the
Yeah.
things to remember in bird that a lot of guys may not be aware of, this is actually true in wildlife too. The pricing is different than what guys are used to on what most commercial companies are used to on the pest side,
Yeah.
and the process is different too. Like most people when they see like a rat or a mouse or something like that, like they're just going like to be honest, and this I don't want to insult anybody, but it doesn't take a whole lot of sales acumen to sell a rat.
You have a
It,
motivated client.
yeah, right. Like same thing with roaches, right? Like all the above. It's like I don't care. Like get
Yeah.
it out of here, right? But when it comes to birds and some of the other wildlife, um, a lot of times these guys are thinking about it from an aesthetic standpoint, or something like that. And when they see the price, they're like, "Well, no, like that value ratio's off." All
Yeah.
right. So
Right.
that requires an actual closing process. Um, so the closing process that we've got in place is actually one that is modeled after high ticket sales. That's what it's modeled after.
Mm.
And it's one that is really guided and guides the customer to a close with the closing statements and other things at the very, very beginning. But I want to circle back to make sure that I answer your initial question
Yeah.
here, which is like, what can they do? So the direct to business arm of what we do is us, where we are actually selling. Like, I mean, we go all the way through. We close the client. We are the contract holder, and then we hand those jobs off to certified service providers, and we do this all over the country. Some of the biggest brands that need help, we have and work with and are in their service channel, which actually can be a great way for smaller operators to get in with some of these national brands, like if they're not currently in service channel.
Mm.
uh, but the other thing is, if somebody has something and they're like, man, I don't want to get into it. First of all, they can send it. You can send that to us, so that, or at least link up to it. You link up with us, and we can at support@avitrol.com.
Su- Support at avitrol.com.
Yeah, support@avitrol.com. They can send that to us, and we'll get back to
Okay.
them and talk through the details. Um, but here's a couple of opportunities here too that I think the listeners hopefully will like. I would imagine that probably most of the audience probably gets into trapping. At
Oh
some
yeah, I would
point.
think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And usually with trapping, what's required is some type of baiting, like
Right.
getting the animal into the trap.
That's right.
All right.
Yep.
So they're already familiar with what we would call pre-baiting on our side. So if someone reaches out to us and they want to, they act, and they want to take the job on, but they don't want to deal with the hassle of doing the active side. We can actually go through and close it. And there are two phases to the treatment. There's your pre-bait phase and then your active bait phase. We
Right.
would happily contract with any of the guys, that are listening, for them to actually execute the pre-bait phase of treatment if they wanted to.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah. That's
and
clever.
and and that already fits inside of their wheelhouse, because they're already used to pre-bait. Now we would provide all the materials. That's a great thing about our direct to business arm, is like we don't charge back materials or anything like that. We carry all of it, and it's basically like free jobs for our certified service providers when we
Mm.
do. So they could do the pre-baiting, and then of course we could actually navigate the contract with someone for another certified service provider for the active baiting. That's no big deal at all. The second thing, and this is really, really lucrative, I think anyway, is that one of the other things that we offer is what we call a protection program, what would traditionally be known as a monitoring program. And this applies both proactively and reactively. So reactively would be, I have a bird issue. Okay, great. We helped you get your bird issue out of there. Our team is always going to work to sell a protection program on the backside of it. If it's our contract, we recommend that to everyone listening to that you do that. And basically all that it consists of is it's just untreated grain, like so many trays. Like if you had 10 trays out there, you reduce them down to about 25% of those trays. Um, and half a cup of untreated grain goes in there, and that gets checked once a month for signs of activity, and that's it. And you might be
Nice.
charging 150, 250, 300, $500 a month or whatever, right, for that service. Now, if they do, remember, bird infestations start small and they get larger over time. And so, you might have done a clean out that was, let's say, 500 pigeons, like I talked about
Yeah.
earlier.
Right.
But
Right.
it's not
Right.
going to go from like 500 pigeons to all of a sudden new flocks move in and you've got
Right.
hundreds overnight. It's going to start with a couple of birds first. Well, that monitoring program allows you to catch those problems before they turn into big
Bigger
issues.
ones.
Again, this is that reactively part after the initial. But I'm going to blow the doors right off of this here in a second.
Mhm.
So on the backside of existing jobs, sell the protection program, that team could then, if they handed us that lead, they could actually be the ones that implement that protection program. Neither the pre-baiting phase nor the protection program phase actually require any kind of licensing at
That's
all.
right. Right.
So it's like you're really just working with untreated grain in
Mhm.
trays, basically, and you're refilling them. And
Right.
you've got an ops sheet and you've got an ops contact where in fact, we provide a check-in form and all this other kind of stuff or whatever. We ask you all the key questions, like on every site visit, that you should be asking anyway, like all that kind of stuff we monitor. And then, like, of course, if anything is amiss, of course, our support team on the ops side is actually in touch, to talk about that.
Any fear about by leaving, it's clearly you're talking about a very small amount of food out there, but is there any fear that that's going to be an attractant to the bird flying overhead that wasn't part of the previous flock or something? Discuss that
Yeah, no,
issue.
that's a common question, and you're right. Like you actually hit on that answer, in that the amount of grain that's going in that tray is so small that it's not, and so infrequent that it's not enough to create a whole brand new infestation. It generally is going to be birds that they're going to end up there anyway, right? Because again, food, water, harborage, some combination of that still exists at the site, and that makes that site still attractive, right,
Right, right.
to other birds. So it's like they would want to show up anyway. So it allows you to catch it while it's small. And the thing is as time goes on, if there are birds that show up because they're already paying their monthly, you're not charging them extra to come in and do your rotation, but you're really only talking about one or two maybe rotations instead of like, and you don't have to do your pre-bait phase because the bird's already pre-baited, all that kind of stuff, right? So you end up making money on the other side. Here's the doors, blowing the doors off. I said I was going to, and this is it. And the guys that have caught this, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Uh, those protection programs can also be sold proactively. So if you have a location that doesn't have a problem with birds, but you're already in there doing the work or whatever, right? Maybe it's a chain that you're doing the work for and you're dealing with other problems that they have. You can actually roll into your package a protection program for birds at those existing locations. So one of the things that we train teams on is like if they you know, um, sell a package to, let's say, a large home improvement store that's a national
Mhm.
chain or something like
Yeah.
that, where they have to get rid of birds. Well, every single location is now eligible, whether or not they have an existing bird issue or not, for some type of program. This is not a foreign concept to the industry. It's already happening at a corporate level with things like rats, and mice and ants, and different things like that, where someone's working with a commercial account manager, and doing it that way. Um, so think about it now. I would encourage listeners to think about it now, where it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Every location that I drive by now is actually a potential bird opportunity. It's not just ones that I can see birds at.
Mm. Wow, that's quite a just trying to get my I'm not a very good salesperson, so I'm trying to wrap my head around that. Which is why I'm not necessarily in sales. I think if I was getting into sales, I'd be inside sales rather than
Right?
outside sales, right?
Yeah.
So I can handle the calls coming in, but
Right.
out there
Yeah.
beating the drum, I don't have the personality. A man's got to know his limitations.
Right.
I'd
Yeah.
like to switch up here
Okay.
and talk about those of us in more rural environment. I'm based in Montana, as people may know. So one of my sad points in my life. I mean, not that it's a huge sadness, but it was sad that we lost Starlicide Complete.
Uh-huh.
And I know that's different, it's not your company, but it's the Starless Complete with DRC 1339. Now, only Wildlife Services has access to 1339. Um, I I know that Avitrol is not primarily a means, it's a chemical frightening device. I just want to kind of put a word in for for those of us in more rural settings to keep that 1 to 5 ratio when the goal is not to frighten but to whack. Um, even though even though it won't kill the whole flock like DRC 1339, is there? I just want to say that there is a place for that because not everywhere. Sometimes what gets me upset about the pest control industry, everything is so urban driven, and it makes perfect sense. That's where the money is. That's where the people are. I totally get it, but there are portions of the country that are in rural areas, and it's, this farm or this feedlot may be 10 miles away from a city center.
Yeah. Mhm.
And if and they don't care if they're dive bombing birds because right now they're dive bombing, but they also lift off and fly away again, and they want
Uh-huh.
them not to lift off again. Is
Yeah.
there any uh, way to have even something even hotter than 1 to 5, or you think that's going to be a bridge too far for the EPA or for your company? Is that a
Yeah. I think probably, I think in the environment that we're in,
that's true.
like honestly, I feel like this part of the discussion really veers more into like societal norm, and and what has developed to become social mores,
Yeah,
uh,
you're right. You're right.
than
Yeah,
it is actual pure science. I mean,
right.
the truth is, the truth is there are so many of these, so many pests, and it's not just birds. There's so many pests, where the volume of predators to the volume of population is skewed in one direction or the other,
Mm,
particularly usually in the direction of the prey.
yeah,
um,
right.
and because of societal norms and the way that they are sort of now, even though we might say that, oh yeah, hey, like, you get the same guy that says, hey, science matters to me, is the
Yeah.
same guy that will very much ignore the science,
Oh yes, I
when heartstrings are involved.
absolutely preach it. So the when it comes to let's talk about secondary poisoning because that's obviously whenever we're talking about chemicals, people are concerned about, well, what happens if, for that 4 pigeons out of the 500, if my dog ate those 4 pigeons, which would be, hard to imagine, but there's people will probably ask these questions. Will my dog get harmed or will my cat get harmed if they eat one of those pigeons that suffered mortality from Avitrol? Could you address some of that for our audience?
Yes. That's a great question. Although I wonder if I could
Oh no,
wrap
go
up
by
on
all
that
means. Yeah.
the very last point
Yep.
there, just talking about like rule and treatments and all of that kind of stuff.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
again, we recommend using discretion. Of course, we recognize our role as chemical producers as
Hmm.
being good stewards. Like that's really what we want to work towards, is doing
Yeah.
that, being great environmental stewards and training people to be great environmental stewards. And so you use discretion as you navigate. I mean, the label gives leeway for lots of different situations. As we know that, like, generally speaking, like if you're working with us, like the template that you're going to be provided is a 1 to 40 template. Again, we set that goal on reduction of the amount of active that being sold, and we've achieved that. Um, I do think, however, like U.S. Fish and Wildlife probably has some things to figure out in terms of overall population control and the methods in which we as a country want to walk down to do that. Something does need to be done. There's no doubt about it at all whatsoever. Um, and Someone is going to have to be willing to sort of wade into the swamp a little bit.
Yeah.
And
Without a doubt.
but
And it is hard. I think you're absolutely right with terms of the social mores, and there's, it's also political, which is just a reflection of the culture, without a doubt. But there's certainly a need, and I just want to remind we haven't really mentioned it, but just can we just tick off the species of birds that are listed on the label? So
but
if
yeah.
you we're not doing robins here, folks. Okay, it's not like these
Yeah,
are a lot of these are non-native birds that don't belong in the U.S. anyway. So let's go down that list of
yeah.
species that are on your label.
Yes, thank you for the
Yeah,
reminder. I do want to address the secondary question there too.
yeah, yeah.
So it's 15 different bird species that are on the label. Of course, there's the big three: pigeons, sparrows, starlings. Those three birds are native to Europe, and so there is no type of federal protection for those birds at all. So if you've heard something like that, that's a misnomer. Like that's
Mm,
misinformation. Um, and then from there, the additional species are birds that are known to commit depredation. So that's all basically, if I remember correctly, like that's all species of grackle. So
mhm.
bow-tailed, great-tailed, and common grackle are on there. The brewer's blackbird, the red-winged blackbird, the rusty blackbird, and the yellow-headed blackbird are all on the label as well.
And
So
when did those get added? Were they always on the label, or were those added since your tenure as owner?
we inherited those birds
Oh, you
being
did. Okay,
on
so
the
I
label.
so that simply slipped my mind back then. So I thought I was wondering if those got added to the label. So that was my mistake. Okay, so it's a
Yeah,
pretty broad list. So you have your ag type birds as well as your urban birds. So this is an equal opportunity product, folks, for both us
yep.
rural folks and for your urban folks and everyone in between. So you have some options here.
Yeah, and I'd say too, like we do help teams with the permitting side. Like if you're starting to get into like seagulls, for instance, that is also something that we'll wade into. We did years ago used to have a product specifically for seagulls. The guys who remember kind of the good old days, it was the powder mix.
Oh,
Uh,
no kidding.
oh yeah, like it was. So that product was so our current product is at most 1% active. So regular strength 0.5%, double strength is 1%.
Yeah.
That product was I think it was 20%.
Oh, oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
So if you
right.
didn't mix that right, things were
Oh
really
man.
things were really happening.
Oh, I've got stories, man. I've got stories that guys have told me from the good
Whew.
old days. And so there's a reason, like we used to get asked about, are you guys gonna bring that one back? And we
Oh,
would be like,
no,
absolutely not. We are
not.
not, we're not walking down that road.
There would have to be an apocalypse to bring that back.
Yeah, right. Like, oh my God.
Oh
But
gosh, yeah, that's just, oh my word. I didn't, yes. So okay, outstanding. So let's address that secondary poisoning,
Yeah,
concern
absolutely.
that people may have if they're using this product. How do we address that, or to what
Yeah,
extent is
yeah, and it's a valid concern in the light of just general pesticides. Like I think we're used to pesticides causing secondary. That's just what, it's like, okay,
there?
if it's a pesticide, and something eats a rat, then that thing's gonna die, and the thing that eats that dies, and the thing that,
Right.
I think rodenticides are actually probably the main reason why we're so used to secondary.
Absolutely.
It's pretty common to like it's like somebody puts out, mass bed in their house or whatever it
Hmm.
is, right? Like, so
It's
we
a big
see it,
problem.
so we kind of, yeah. But with Avitrol, there's actually no, we've got scientific study on this, in addition to field testing, but there's no secondary poisoning, no true secondary poisoning with Avitrol. And by the way, like I want to be clear so that people know, because people do get mixed up between
Hmm.
secondary and primary poisoning.
Yeah.
Secondary poisoning is where, there's something that has, fully metabolized the thing that it ate, and then something comes along and eats that thing and dies because that thing is in the system of the thing that it ate. That's what true secondary poisoning is. Birds very quickly metabolize the active in Avitrol, and like I said before, there's not a whole lot of active in it in
Hmm.
the first. And so because of those two factors, if something comes along and eats, that bird that, has fallen, got an overdose or something like that, that thing will be just fine. Primary poisoning would be if that same dog now somehow got access to a baiting tray and started feeding on it. And so, by the way, I want to make sure that all the listeners know too, as these treatments are happening, this bait is generally elevated. We're
Yeah.
talking roof level baiting and all sorts of stuff. So the trays that we use are specialized, all sorts of things that are in place to make sure that primary poisoning doesn't happen. And then the labels also got parameters to make sure too that, like, birds, particularly grain feeding non-targets, aren't actually in
Yeah.
there during the treatment process. That's actually one of the questions that we ask, as guys are checking into the site
Yeah.
and they're looking at things and doing all that kind of stuff is, did you observe any non-target, any grain feeding non-targets? Did you observe them feeding on the bait, right? Two
Do
separate
you
questions.
do you recommend trail cameras? I mean, now that we have so many electronic
Mhm.
monitoring type devices,
Yeah.
it's expensive for someone to, personally monitor a pre-bait station. Uh, I don't recall if the label requires you to stay on site when you're using the active or not, but I mean, I'm a nervous Nelly, but I would probably want to just hang around just in case. But nevertheless, but would you, does someone using a trail camera or some sort of electronic monitoring device to see if there are non-targets feeding on that pre-bait,
Yeah.
is that something your company recommends
Yeah,
as a way
that's
to?
absolutely something that they can do. It gives them eyes, when they wouldn't normally have eyes on.
Mm,
And time between the pre-baiting processes is longer on
yeah.
those stops than than other parts of the process, right? Um, so yeah, we've had guys that'll do that, and that works just fine. In fact, actually, there's one case I'm thinking of where we actually spotted, I think it was like a species of finch that we're getting in there and actively feeding. We're able to switch out the type of bait that was being used
Yeah.
to something larger, so that they couldn't actually
Actually
consume.
swallow it. Yeah.
So that can come in handy. What I would be paying attention to, like if I'm the operator, I would be paying attention to the surroundings. Like in that situation I just mentioned, there was a large public park like right next door, and it was known for having all sorts of species of birds. So when we put out, all of these trays, it pulled those birds,
Mm,
in that direction basically. So that's something to think about. That could have been avoided actually with just a little bit more observation on the fronts, like during survey,
yeah.
prior to pre-baiting, right? Like so that's something that could happen. The other thing too, that is one of the misconceptions is that you've got to stay on site during active baiting. By the way,
Yeah. Right.
to your point earlier.
Yeah.
And you don't per the label. Only time you have to stay on site is if it's on the ground and an area accessible to the public. One of
Ah,
the
okay. All right.
but in a sensitive site or a site where there are people around, one of the things that we recommend, and one of the things that our operators like a lot, um, is overnight rotation. So that's something where, birds don't feed when they roost overnight. And usually right around sunset is about when birds are going to start settling down to start roosting.
Mhm.
So a popular method might be I rotate in the evening. Let's say sunset is at 6 p.m. I put my active bait down at, let's say, 6:30 p.m. and then I rotate back in the next morning, let's say before store hours, 7:30, 8 a.m. or something like that. And I remove that active bait and replace it with live bait. And you can do rotations like that. They're perfectly safe. And
So you're
Yeah.
getting those birds when they're coming off the roost and feeding immediately, and then you can remove that active and then replace it with your
Yep.
pre-bait again, and just keep to see if they're, because if that you had a good treatment, then you're basically done. If you're not, well, then you kept them feeding and you just go
Yep.
out with another tray again. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that ensures that bait is just not sitting out there days at a time. I want to make
Right.
sure guys know that too. Like a 1 to 40 dilution ratio doesn't make up for like overexposure. So what you can't do is just come out and live bait and leave it out there for like a week and expect all the bird has been feeding on is like active bait. Like you will expect to see more mortality than if you did an overnight rotation. Right? Like that's
Yeah.
their diet is a pesticide. That's probably not going
Yeah.
to work so well. Um,
So on the secondary poisoning issue, and that you let's this would be, is there concern about, you talked about that the product is metabolized by the bird. What about the kernels that might be in the crop of the bird and not
mhm,
necessarily metabolized?
mhm.
Is Avitrol a weight-based ingredient? In other words, the volume needed
Right.
to affect, a dachshund would be a
Yep.
lot less than needed a Great Dane, right? So,
You're right.
what kind of concern would that be for uh, animals eating the crop of two or
Yep.
three pigeons or something?
Yes, so we do have studies on this. It is an LD50 product, and we have all those studies there
Hmm.
available on that. And of course, any of the studies I've referenced, if someone wants access to them, again, they could email that same support@avitrol.com. We're more than happy to provide that.
Nice.
Um, but as far as like eating the crop goes, um, it is possible that something could get, that's called primary poisoning because they're
Yep.
directly eating the kernels if they did that. The best way to avoid situations like that from happening just so happens to also be the overnight rotation or an early rotation that I mentioned. So here's the thing, just like taking a medicine on an empty stomach, if you can get the birds around that first and second feeding, you get immediate grounded reaction. And what you don't have to deal with is birds traveling somewhere, falling somewhere, whatever it is, right? Where you don't have access to them or don't see them or something like that. So if there happens to be, a bird that expires and there's, maybe something in its crop or something like that, right? Um, the ideal place for that to happen is actually at the place where you're feeding it, right? Like directly. So if it's on the rooftop, like I want that to happen on the rooftop, right? And that is very possible, again, to get that predictable result. But knowing that birds are going to feed around daybreak or so, which is going to be somewhere around 5 or so in the morning, allows me to go, okay, great. Like, how can I make sure I get them during their first feeding? An overnight rotation is really great for something like that, where you could rotate in really early in the morning, put that active bait down, circle back like within a few hours, remove that active bait. That's a great way to control the amount of time that there's exposure. And if you're thinking like, that sounds like a lot of work or whatever it is, listen, like build that into your proposals, right? It's not like you're showing up to that location for free.
Hmm.
And that's what the teams that we've seen be successful monetarily, that's what they're doing. They're building that extra time in. In fact, honestly, that's where I've seen more mistakes made as well, is with someone over promising something and under delivering. Now all of a sudden they're panicked, they're over their timeline, they're trying to get something done fast or whatever, right? And then all of a sudden they create all sorts of incidents downline.
Yeah.
Um, and so again, this is why I said earlier, to reiterate, that this process is a system. And just to remind guys, like businesses run on systems. Like if you were building a business, you're building an engine and it runs on systems.
Right.
And this is meant to be a part of that engine. You want to plug a system in there. You don't want to plug a product in
Yeah, and so there's plenty of resources, of course, at the avitrol.com website, and that your company through, so I'm going to put another plug in for it, support at Avitrol, Avitrol dot
there.
com,
Right.
Avitrol, just like spelled like it sounds, folks. Support at Avitrol.com. So there are a lot of resources available. So if you have any type of an interest in this type of work, even if you're not planning on doing it yourself,
Mhm.
how take a little time, check it out. You might change your mind. You might be able to get some work doing the pre-baiting type stuff. So the time to do this is before the client calls, folks. And I know things are getting
Yeah.
busy for many of you coming up here into the spring, but you want to at least have this in your back pocket because everyone needs another revenue stream to be sure, in another
Yep.
tool in the toolbox to
Yep.
solve certain problems. And so this gives you options
Mhm.
for your clients that you may want to investigate certainly more.
Yep.
Anything that we haven't covered about Avitrol, because we've gone into a lot of different directions. We talked about sales, we talked about the various myths with the product, we've talked about how people can strategize and get more additional training and the support that your company provides for it. Uh, what are anything that we haven't talked about that you're like, I want to be sure that the listener takes away before we close out today?
Yeah. I think understanding that there's no silver bullet for birds in general, right? And I could actually probably say the same thing with pests in general. That there's probably not a silver bullet for any particular pest problem, but there are both effective and ineffective solutions, and that's really it. That's a thing to keep in mind. Um, all the manufacturers honestly have great support, right? Like reach out, leverage that support. That matters. Know too, like that this tool can be used alongside other methods as well. So it's not like you have to pick and choose per se. If you
Yeah.
decide that, hey, I want to go with an exclusion program or something like that, it's like, to me, it makes perfect sense to add your recurring onto that. You could sell, a net and spike or net and slope program or something like that. And then also sell a monitoring program on top of it, right, to have your recurring revenue in there as well. So now it's like you've got your regular, quarterly or biannual inspections on your install, plus you've got your monitoring program in place, right? And you can really put together a comprehensive bird program that way, depending on the client's budget. So there's a lot of flexibility and leeway here. But I would say, guys, like, I mean, remember the thing that you got into when you got into the thing. Um, it wasn't super scientific usually the way that you got into it. Like an opportunity kind of presented itself, and you were like, yeah, like I'm pretty sure I can do that or whatever. I've
That's
been working
right.
for this company doing that thing. I'm going to go out on my own and do that or
Yeah.
whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
It's like, so all that's being presented right now, like if you're not doing it, is an opportunity, and it's like you don't have to go through the scientific method to actually figure it out. It's like
That's right.
we let us handle the scientific method part of it.
That's right.
Say yes, and we'll, we'll work
It's a
out the
lot easier than hanging net. So as important as netting is, I'm not bashing netting, folks.
yeah,
Netting has definitely a place to play, but if as entry work goes, it's a whole lot easier putting bait in the tray and sitting around and monitoring than having to be up on a 40-foot ladder putting up netting or something.
yes. I mean,
That's just me.
no, no, you're right. Much less tired arms. But no, I mean, we have manufactured everything over the years. I mean, Avitrol, has been around since, I mean, the original, stuff on it was formed in the 60s. It's been around longer than pretty much anything else that's out there
Yeah,
in
it's been a long
bird.
time.
I mean,
Yeah.
over the years, man, like we've actually manufactured net, we've manufactured spike. We actually offered methoenthranolate, based options.
Oh,
Um,
really?
we
Okay.
sold,
Wow.
yeah, we were first to market with a sterilant for birds, way ahead of its time, back in like the late 70s or
Oh
so,
my
it paved the
gosh.
way for the current sale. So we've been in and sold most everything in bird. We've seen a lot of solutions. The reason why we've landed on this one is it seems to cover the most ground overall over the things that we've offered over time. And of course, we're always on the hunt looking for, there are other, products I won't talk about right now that we've
Yeah.
got in development, and other lines, even other, other vertebrate wildlife that we may be getting into,
Well,
as
good.
well in the near
Good.
future that we're working
Because
on.
we really need more companies to try to innovate. And I've been very pleased with the way the industry has innovated since 2000. I think 2000, I'm going to call that a
Yeah.
tipping point just because it's an easy number.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to traps and things, a lot of little nuanced things, just different designs that really help with efficiency.
Mhm.
But we have been sort of lacking on the pesticide side, for good reason. It's expensive, right? I mean, that's just, let's be honest, it's extraordinarily expensive to get a
Yeah.
product registered and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. But I I am glad. I do hope that you guys can come up with something. Other companies, if you're listening, we desperately need additional tools because it's getting more and more complex,
Yeah.
both on the trapping end. I mean, states are banning types of traps and things. It's getting tough. So
Yeah.
we really need something out there. So I'm really glad to have you come. And I just came up with another question, and I
Okay.
just want to hit you with, and that is, how would you compare? I don't need you to go into prices. We're trying to just see the ratio
Yeah.
of, an exclusion job. If I'm dealing with building X
Hmm.
and it costs me, I'm just going to throw a number out. If it costs me $1,000 to do exclusion on that building, just,
Uh-huh.
say it's a little house or something,
Yeah.
in comparison, or a 1000x, what would it cost? How is Avitrol comparison in terms of that cost? because
Yeah.
because that's one of the things that sometimes
Mhm.
a business would rather have a small fee that they can do every year if
Yep.
necessary, if
Yep.
it came to that, rather than a large chunk of money to put into a netting job.
Yep. Yep.
And so can you talk a little bit about that in terms of the relationship of the pricing? Is it 10%? Is it
Yeah.
20%? How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing is, I think inside the question is, uh it's like the ratio of cost to objective, right?
Right, right, right.
Um, so if the objective is to move the birds from the location, right, create a bird-free zone, that's really the apples to apples cost that we're looking to compare. And that's really what your customer is actually asking you for, regardless of maybe what they say. They might say, "Oh, the birds are getting in the warehouse and it's really frustrating," or whatever. It's like, well, the birds in the warehouse are just spillover from all the birds that are on the outside of the
That's
warehouse, which is a lot more of them, right?
that's
It's like,
right.
why don't we take care of all of it and create a bird-free zone, and then you don't have to
Right.
worry about this problem anymore. Um, and so, what I have seen some companies do, is sort of piecemeal some stuff for customers that doesn't actually create the end objective that they're looking for.
Hmm.
Um, it just sort of, so it's like, hey, here's the objective. Let me create a bird-free zone, and let's say I'm going to come through and I'm going to exclude and do all this stuff or whatever. Well, it's like, okay, to keep birds out of here altogether, it's going to be, $150,000 or whatever, right? And the customer's like, we
Uh,
we didn't put that in our budget this year,
right.
right?
Yeah. Right. Who has 150 grand burning a hole in their
Yeah,
budget?
just
Right.
sitting
just
around,
just
just
sitting around, just
rainy day fun bird project.
that's right.
It's like great.
for,
Like
for
this is
bird control.
yeah, like this is going to take 3 years by committee to go through. It's what's going to
That's right.
right? Whereas now if it's like, okay, great, if we're trying to create a bird-free zone and you compare apples to apples, that same job that might be $150,000 probably going to be like $10,000, for a treatment like this. Plus, you get to set up your recurring. Plus, the smart guys there, especially if they're creating a side by side bid, where they've already seen the 150 grand, they might actually up that a little bit and give themselves a little more margin. Maybe I'm going
Yeah.
to charge 20,000 for it, or 30,000 or something because I've just given them a massive discount is what it looks like on
Yeah.
paper. But with Avitrol, typically you get about a quarter mile of repelling. So it's not like um, I almost call like some of the exclusion stuff like a sniper rifle solution, and Avitrol is a little more of a shotgun solution,
Okay.
right? Where it's like, okay, with a sniper rifle, I have to have a very specific target. I have to aim here and hit here, right? With Avitrol, because you generally get a quarter mile of coverage, like I can actually treat the roof, and that's going to take care of the beams on the inside of the building. It's going to take care of the sign out there by the access road, the parking lot lights, the dumpster, the pallets in the back. It's going to take care of like the whole thing, generally speaking. And so that's really the cost comparison, is what is the cost to truly solve the problem and not shuffle the problem from one area of a facility to another area of a facility, or do it and then hope that it solves the problem. I have seen this happen. I've seen bird divisions for large companies do this, and actually they're not very many things that get me going much. I'm a pretty rock solid guy where I don't get angry really easily, but like things where I look at a business practice and I'm like, I don't know if that is actually moral. That kind of stuff gets me.
That's
Um,
right.
and
Yeah.
and so what I'll see happen is I'll see these guys sell six-figure contracts, and they'll come in and they'll install all this stuff, right, for this company, and the birds will move from position A to position B. And now in position B, they can't do anything about it, or they're going to try and come back to the customer and ask for more money,
Money.
right? And then here's what they'll do. Here's what we'll see them do. And a lot of guys don't see this happen because it happens behind the curtain. They'll go, crap, like, I need that 5 pound box of Avitrol or something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
they won't charge a customer extra. They'll take care of those birds that are left or whatever, right? And they'll say, see, our solution worked. Like we
Yeah.
sold it, it's our solution. It's like, that's,
That's kind of scary because if something goes awry, the question is, did you have client permission to use a pesticide on their site? I
oh
mean,
yeah,
that is that's some scary stuff. So I
I
mean,
agree with it. Yep.
I'm just trying to think of how, because I think some states have notification laws.
Mhm.
So wow, yeah, whew, that would I don't doubt that that probably happened somewhere. I think
Oh no,
that's some
it's
scary
more
stuff.
common. It's more common, than it seems, and that's
Oh
simple
wow.
because again, you
Yeah.
just don't know. Like the thing is like if I come in again, I've got food, water, and harborage, right?
Right, right.
If I can't eliminate all of the French fries as well as take away the harborage, like I still have an enticing attract a target for birds.
Yeah.
If I can't take care of all of the water that happens as well as the harborage, I still have something that's very enticing for birds. So the truth is if I come in and I sell this and I go, okay, great, we're going to get these birds out of here for you. I don't actually know that they're going to leave. I don't know where they're going to shovel to, is the truth. I've really got my fingers crossed, hoping that they move from, again, position A, and that position B is somewhere across the street or across town or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah,
Right.
that's the
And so
hope.
now, yeah. So now imagine like if I'm selling that contract and it's six figures, um,
Mm,
imagine the pressure that I'm under now, to create the thing that I said I was going to create, which was a bird-free zone.
right.
And so I've seen a lot of companies panic, and rush to do something that's like, to me, the thing, again, where I was talking about ethics earlier, my problem with that is more you express to the customer you were going to create this thing, and then you actually brought the solution to the table and told them that it was going to do this thing. And without being 100% sure that it's going to happen, you've got to express that. It's like, man, if you're 70% sure, I understand that it might be hard to sell a six-figure contract and tell them you're 70% sure it's going to take care of the problem, but you have to, ethically, you need to say that.
Yeah, I really agree more. You have to, without a doubt. Well, Sheldon, really glad to have you on board here, and I'm glad we had a chance don't be a stranger. I do hope when you
Yes,
come
thank
out with
you.
some new products or new systems, I do hope you would think of Living the Wildlife podcast and come back. So
Yes, love to.
if you're just coming onto the show now, you've been listening to Sheldon Dillingham. He is the owner of Avitrol Corporation, avitrol.com. That's Avitrol.com. And we've been talking about sales and the use of Avitrol, the myths related to Avitrol, what Avitrol can do for you, the support that you can get from the company, and how it can fit into a larger business system. Those of you that don't have a pesticide license, I'm going to tell you, get your pesticide license by
Agreed.
hook or by crook. Get it somehow. Even if you never plan on using it, you may find that it's as your bones start getting older, it might be something that's advantageous, but also gives you a little bit more job security. But if you're not, you have the ability to work with Avitrol and serve your client even if you're not necessarily doing the work, and that sometimes can build you goodwill with a client as well, and they can work with you.
Absolutely.
A lot of support there. He's really brought this company. I'm glad he kept it going. There was a time there I was wondering if we were going to lose Avitrol, and I'm really glad that he was able to do that. And he's been kind enough also to send me some training material that's coming up pretty too. So I'm really grateful for that. I'm grateful
Absolutely.
for that. Well, again, everyone, you've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and if you can give us a 5-star review, we'd be grateful for that. Living the Wildlife is part of a program to help you with the technical side, the detailed side of vertebrate pest control. That's our vision and goal with this particular work. I'd love to get your comments. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Tell me what you like, what you don't like, perhaps future shows, perhaps you would like to be on the show. Definitely reach out. I would love to hear from you. Yes, even the criticism. We'll take that as well. Well, we call this living the wildlife. Why do we call it living the wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.